Hidden within the darkest corners of history lie secrets so repugnant they defy comprehension. Beneath the veneer of civilization, a sinister industry thrived in the shadows. The tales that emerged from these abhorrent breeding farms will test the limits of your credulity. The unspeakable events that unfolded within these walls will make your stomach churn, as we expose a twisted truth that society has long tried to bury. Slave breeding was used in U.S. slave states to increase profits. This entailed pushing female slaves to become pregnant, forcing male slaves to sleep with women, and favoring ladies and young girls who could produce many offspring. Raising slaves was a way to conserve money and make up for the loss of employees with the end of the Atlantic slave trade. Slaves were products, and their capacity to bear offspring was exploited for profit. British Quakers and Christians, headed by William Wilberforce, campaigned together to halt the Atlantic slave trade. The Committee for the Abolition of the Slave Trade helped end the slave trade. British Parliament passed the Slave Trade Act in 1807. This statute helped end transatlantic slavery. It reduced American slaves by preventing British participation in the slave trade. At the same time, cotton, sugarcane, and rice production all went up in the United States, especially in the Deep South and the West. This increase in farming and the fact that slaves couldn't be brought in from Africa led to a greater need for workers. Slaves were viewed as property and not as people. They were stripped of their most basic rights and turned into things that their owners could buy, sell, and own. Slaves had no formal rights, had no say over their own lives, and had to obey their owners' orders without question. They were not allowed to have basic human rights like freedom, liberty, and the right to choose for themselves. After 1808, it was illegal to bring slaves into the United States. This, along with the growing need for labor in the expanding farming areas of the Deep South, caused the internal slave market to grow. One question emerges with haunting clarity. How did the illegal importation of slaves into the United States after 1808 give rise to a thriving internal market, where human lives were bought and sold to satisfy the growing labor demands of the Deep South? Slave owners in the United States started to sell slaves from the Upper South to the Deep South, where there was more work to be done. This trade of slaves within a country produced a profitable market that helped keep slavery going and allowed slaves to move to places where the farming economy was growing. Slave owners did things like breeding their slaves to increase the number of slaves. They made male slaves sleep with women or girls in order to have children who could be kept as slaves and made to work. Slave women who were thought to be fertile and likely to have a lot of children were favored and forced to get pregnant. This use of their ability to have children made slave women even less human and turned them into vessels for making more slaves. Slaves were turned into property through laws and practices that erased their humanity and turned them into things. These legal and social structures made it possible for slaves to be sold as goods and made it easier for them to have children as a way to increase the number of workers. Slavery became a deeply established part of society. Laws and cultural norms that made slaves seem less than human kept the practice going. Some slave owners used religious readings to explain why slavery was okay. They looked to Bible texts like the Curse of Canaan as proof that God wanted African people to be ruled over and turned into slaves. This twisted view of religion gave moral justification to exploiting and mistreating slaves, which helped keep the system of slavery going.